Hello, everyone, and welcome to AI, the Cloud, and the Future of Content Management. Our moderator today is Glenn Dixon, who has written about media and entertainment industry technology for many years, and we are always happy to say, is contributing editor to TV News Check. Glenn, please begin as soon as you're ready.
Good afternoon and welcome to AI, the Cloud, and the Future of TV Content Management. I'm Glenn Dixon. Broadcasters and cable networks are producing more programming and distributing it on more platforms than ever before, so efficiently managing all of that content is vital. The challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic have also put a new focus on being able to efficiently share content through remote workflows, as well as to leverage one's archive to fill airtime in times of crisis. Today, our panel of experts will discuss how new technologies such as AI and cloud services can help broadcasters meet these challenges. Joining me are Renard Jenkins, VP of Content Transmission and Production Technology for Warner Media, Mike Palmer, Senior Director, Advanced Technology Media Management for Sinclair Broadcast Group, Joe Adelia, Director of Technology Projects for Hearst Television, Rick Young, SVP and Head of Global Product for LTN Global, and Raul Cospin, Director of Product Strategy for News for Gillette. For the audience, we'd like to make this experience as interactive as possible. There are some poll questions that'll be popping up on your screen that we'd like you to weigh in on. And please use the Q&A function to ask questions of our panelists, which we'll address towards the end. And if you're having any technical issues, please use the chat function to reach out to TV News Check publisher Kathy Haley, who is helping to manage the event. Let's start with our broadcasters, and I guess we'll start with Renard. He's got a little mix of everything there at Warner Media. How does your company approach content management and archiving overall? And have there been any changes due to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, well, thanks, Glenn. I think the main thing that we focus on is making sure that we have the highest quality original product coming in to our archive. We want to take the best possible version of either a master, whether it is news, whether it's film, whether it's sports. We want to get the highest quality. The next thing that we really look at is, okay, is this something that we think is going to have legs for us to bring back and utilize over time? And if it is, then we kind of separate that out into sort of a different tier. If we do believe that it's something that maybe is really more of a historical thing that we would bring out every now and then, we do, very much like most people, we put it into a deep archive. But we make sure that as we're doing all of this, we're really focused on the tagging portion of all of this, because, my buddy Joe Adelia says it all the time, if you have bad metadata, you're going to have a bad experience. So that's one of the things that we focus on, across all of Warner Media, is making sure that our tagging is really good.
Okay, thanks. And we'll explore, metadata and how you derive it and how you use it in a little more depth later on. Mike, wanted to get a sense of how Sinclair is approaching content management and how you've dealt with COVID-19 and using some of those tools.
The first thing that really COVID had an impact on media management was in our regional sports networks. Whenever the games went away, then we had to fill the air with something. And so we went to the archive for that and started airing a bunch of classic games. That hit at a really interesting time for us, because we were in the middle of migrating away from the previous owner to our new facility that we were designing, and trying to project what our usage was through all of our statistics, just way out of kilter whenever you're pulling everything from the archive instead of constantly pushing things into it. So that made things interesting, but it does demonstrate the value of the archive, both from the perspective of being able to generate sports highlights, but also being able to go back to it in case your games go away for some period of time. But sports is just one part of our transformation at Sinclair. And that also includes news and also the production side of our house and playing things out for air and channel origination. So we're working on all those parts of media management at this point, and it is at the core of our business transformation.
Okay, thanks. Joe, can you talk a little bit about Hearst approaches content management for news, and maybe talk specifically about the utility of news content, how much stuff in your archive you wind up using? I know you guys have been on a project with this for some time.
Yeah, happy to. Afternoon, everybody. So we have a pretty robust news archive system, which was very fortunate to have in place for the pandemic, and it allowed us to reach in and access a lot of content. As as we know, in the early days, it was a little difficult to get crews on the street or get interviews, et cetera, until all of the Zoom sphere kind of ramped up. So we leveraged our archive quite well, and what we do is that we for about the past 8 years have taken all of our digital archives, everything that's used in a day, and we push it out to a cloud resource, and through our content sharing platform that's by Bit Central Oasis, we're able to not only have a single station have access to that content, but the entire group. And this was one of the largest resources throughout, especially the early days of the pandemic, before we got our arms around what we could and how to cover things, and how to stay safe. We were using this ability to reach into each individual station's archive, as well as share day and date assets. And this was all possible because of the way we do it. We actually archive the entire metadata set and story body from our news editorial system, stays with that asset as it gets archived. So we have some pretty robust systems that allow for drag and drop of moving a story, but also the video asset will follow. And those type of streamlined workflows are really what got us through the last year. Plus, I have to say that we have a very talented base of news personnel and news people that really know how to get the job done, and that's what really makes the world go around, right? Is having the talented people behind the systems.
Yeah, well, I know we've had folks from Bit Central on some previous webinars, and they talk about their usage of their content sharing system just exploding, through the first couple months of COVID. So that dovetails with what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Raul, what are you hearing from Delette's customers, and how has their approach maybe changed over the last year when it comes to content management?
Well, actually, I really think that there is a before and an after COVID, and the whole mentality changed actually when it comes to how do we deploy systems. How do we make use of AI, or how do we make use of the cloud, actually? There are three key pillars that we are seeing as major steps that I guess every single technology provider needs to reach, which is first to provide full mobility. So meaning that being a newsroom or being any production organization, we work more and more from home, and the profound nature of the newsroom is also to be dispersed. So you've got reporters, and you've got people in the field, you've got freelancers, and so on. So everyone is here and there. So mobility became key, and who says mobility, work from home and so on, means also much more collaboration. And so this is at Dalette why we come with a new concept called Storytelling 360, which is a better way to organize the collaboration at the story level. So the second aspect is really agility and the way we can easily deploy systems, and the way we can ease the maintenance and the upgrades of these systems, and adopting cloud technologies will ease that process. So a combination of web-based user interface and cloud-native technologies like Kubernetes and Dockers really ease that process. I always like to compare this with Facebook. If you use Facebook, you're going to have, there are multiple upgrades of the platform of Facebook every day, but nobody sees it, right? And this is what we really want to reach in terms of technology. And the last point is the flexibility as well. So, how you want to consume technology, and a lot of companies were license-based, and obviously a lot of companies like Dalet are transitioning to a model in which we can sell as subscription and going up to full SaaS. And I think that cloud, SaaS, and those kind of cloud technologies, COVID just accelerated by, let's say, 5 years, the adoption of those kind of technologies. So that's a major step, and COVID was some sort of eye opener for this.
And Raul, just briefly, you mentioned that Storytelling 360 organizes the information around a story in a whole new way. Can you just briefly explain what you mean by that?
Yes, so Storytelling 360 gives you 4 major components that are available at the story level. So first of all, a story, whether it's for news or a production in general or sports, you need to deliver to multiple platforms. So you need to make multiple versions of your story. So having an umbrella story with all the different versions of your story. So that's the first point. The second point is really to have all the objects that you need to use part of the story. So you want to use some video material, maybe some pictures, maybe you need some wires or some EDLs or some graphic objects. So everything is stored together with the story. And the third aspect is really to have the access to all your production tools directly from the story. So for example, I can ingest directly in the story, or I can edit directly from the story. So, in the past, a lot of systems that we offered, even ourselves in the past, you have the ingest somewhere, and then you have the production somewhere else, and then you have your script, and you have your rundowns, and you're trying to link all of that together. Here, we really give the ability to ingest directly a backpack feed, for example, directly in your story. And the last point, which is probably the most important point, is how I'm going to organize the production around the story. So who is going to do what? Do I need someone to do the editing? Do I need someone to do the graphics? Do I need someone to go shoot an interview on the field and all of that? So that's really the organization to track the progress of your story, the editorial speeches, the cost of your story coverage, and so on, and the progress of it. So those 4 different aspects are this new package called Storytelling 360, and that allows you to have pretty much all those different 4 areas directly built into the story.
Okay, thank you. Rick, LTN Global, is really known for providing, transport services and live production services more recently. How can you more seamlessly link those live production and transmission workflows to content management and archive systems?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thanks for having me. As you said, LTN is very much focused on live video workflows, and we really see our ecosystem of services as a companion to whatever production system we're integrating with, or we're talking to, or working, whether it's in the sports world, in cloud and centralized production, or news, obviously in the newsroom production world, et cetera. And the key is, a number of different levels, and I'm sure we'll jump into sort of deeper metadata conversation as we go through this discussion. But the key is, from our perspective, is providing visibility to the dizzying array of feeds that are coming into production environments, right? And across a countless number of sources, across more than you can count types of formats of content, right? So how do you provide visibility in one place? That's number one. Number two is, how do you notify the users or the folks that need to know, whether it's in a story specific workflow like Raul was just describing, or it's sort of at a more general facility level. How do you let folks know that something of interest is coming into the facility, and tight integration with those tools, whether it's the newsroom computer system or the content management system or what have you, those tools need to be available. Then of course, sort of extrapolating the right metadata as it comes in. And again, maybe I'll hold off on a deeper conversation on that until we dig into that, but we have a lot of good ideas around that and I'm always anxious to hear what guys like Mike and Joe and Renard have to say on that topic.
Okay,
Glenn,
thanks.
Glenn, if I could just jump in for 1 second on the concept of the real time and non-real time. There is a working group that's been put together between SEMPTE and the ATSC. It's kind of a liaison that's being put together to kind of take that non-real time world and the real time world and put them together. Yeah, a lot of it is around ATSC 3.0, but it's really what the concept is to use a single orchestration layer between the non-real time and the real time side of the house. So you can see how SMPTE 2110 would play in, how media, just file-based media plays in, and also the real time world. So if anybody's looking for any more information on that, you can get it off of the SMPTE website, and I believe the ATSC website as well. But a lot more to come with orchestration for as Rick was defining.
Okay, thanks. Renard, you mentioned before some of the decisions about what bit rate you store stuff at, and overall you have the desire to store as high as you can afford. Basically, given a piece of content, but then you have to weigh things like how much you'll use it and the costs associated, et cetera. But can you talk about the pros and cons of storing something at transmission quality bit rate, which seems to be something that people have gotten a little more comfortable with in the last year or so, versus the production quality bit rate, and how that decision changes based on the age of content, and I guess also the type of content. Warner Media certainly has a diverse pool you're working with.
Yeah, the whole thing that we look at is our library is huge, and it is a hybrid state right now, because we have everything from physical media, just like everyone else, to to the latest file format or whatever is coming in. We look a lot when we're looking at our film stuff. We do look at JK 2000. J2K, geez, I'm having a hard time to speak today, J2K, and we look at the lossless version of that because it's something that's a little bit easier to standardize on. However, there is a gap when we start to deal with, camera originals, because a lot of that is proprietary to the camera manufacturers themselves. So we really try and stay within areas where there are standards for our film side of the world, and we kind of focus on that. So when it comes to bit rate, we want, whatever is coming out of the camera is what we really feature. That's really what we want to grab. When it comes to a lot of the news, you're exactly right. We're pulling a lot of that in as ASI transmission, standard coming in through fiber or satellite or wherever we're getting it. We're of course moving to eventually start to pull in SRT and things of that nature in that space. So that's going to further compress it. But when we start to really think about it, it's really about what is this content going to be used for? If it is going to be used in news, there's a little bit more tolerance for not necessarily always having to have the highest quality, but you want good quality. But if you're talking film, you're talking something that's going to have long legs that you plan to distribute throughout different platforms and things of that nature, then yeah, you definitely want the highest bit rate that you can get. So that kind of drives some of our decisions. And then you have sports, where it's not just about the quality of the video. It's really about how does the video deal with motion a lot when you're thinking about sports. And so the higher bit rates, but also the higher frame rates come into play there. And how do we store that kind of material so that we can reuse it over and over again? Those are the questions that we kind of toss back and forth internally with our teams at Warner Media.
Glenn, I've got some color around how Sinclair is doing that.
Great.
Yeah.
And these are different businesses, right? So we have lots of local TV stations, as does Joe, that are generating lots of content. And the problem with news archives at a local television station level is you don't know what is going to be used, and the reuse rate varies anywhere from 15 to 5%. Okay, of everything that's dumped into a news archive. And that is, I do use the word dumped many times because people just put everything in there. Now we have to think about, what does it cost to store this over time? Because the more content I have in that library, and it is growing every day, the more it's going to cost me to keep that. So we've taken an approach that's fairly fairly critical in saying what content here is going to justify the cost of carrying that into the future. So one of the things that comes out of that is, well, what content should we delete? Well, with an editorial hat on, you don't want to delete any content because you really don't know what's going to be used in the future. But you do know that if content has been used in, say, the first 6 or 12 months, if it's been pulled out of the archive in the first 6 or 12 months, it's probably going to be pulled out again at some point. Okay, so maybe that suggests keeping it at a higher level of quality. For content that hasn't seen any use in years, then you don't want to get rid of it, but you might want to drop the bit rate down to something that the news department's budget can afford to keep. Okay, because nobody wants to actually throw stuff in the trash can at some point. So that's kind of that's kind of the calculus that we're going through right now with a very strong business perspective. Yes, we want to keep things at the highest possible quality that we can afford. Okay, because the highest quality that we keep means we can get more value out of it if we sell it to somebody else or if we reuse it, and we do reuse lots and lots and lots of content. It was funny. I get a report on my desk every week of how much content is being reused. And yes, our content reuse has gone up over the COVID time, but it has, we don't think it's been driven by COVID. We think it's been driven by other business process improvements that we've been going through. And the other thing I'll say is we look at media management as not being MAM or PAM or archive. It's a continuum. Okay.
Right.
So, and we're really trying to get rid of this artificial wall between, production and archive. Okay. So I've asked people in our organization to strike the term MAM from their vocabularies. So it's media management at this point, and we don't store things in an archive. We store it at different storage tiers. And we want that movement across that spectrum of space to be transparent to the user. And when we move across that, we can move across it in bit rates and cost of storage and level of metadata and all these other things. It's really kind of a flexible landscape at the moment.
Thanks. Can you give me a little more color on what kind of bit rates we're talking about? Particularly you mentioned playing back classic games on the sports nets, from the archive. I mean, what sort of bit rate would you be storing that stuff at? And I guess, how does your usability of that content inform how you're going to store it? If it's something you're just going to play back like it was recorded, what kind of bit rate are we talking about?
Is that for me, Glenn?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're looking at a lot of content that was encoded with older technologies, MPEG-2 at 50 megabits. We think that we can get down to an equivalent level of quality using H.264 at 15, 18 megabits at that point, and get a huge amount of savings in terms of size and cost over the long term. And that's perfectly fine if we can go ahead and play that out directly from the archive through the playout systems. And that's another thing we're looking at is what format can we use as our mezzanine format that we can play out directly without having to go through another transcode step. Because again, as we're in the cloud, we're being charged for every piece of media movement and every transformation that we go through. So that's really important for us to make sure that we have a standard format that we can use from a deep storage tier and then bring it all the way back out to play out for us.
Okay, thanks. Rick, you guys are in the transport business. How have you seen your customers' thoughts on bit rates change, and what they think is acceptable and how they manage the encodes and re-encodes through the whole supply chain?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the last, how long have we been sitting in our homes? 14 months, whatever this has been at this point, have changed dramatically what people think is sort of acceptable, right? I mean, Zoom is now a primary acquisition tool for just about everybody. So that's a natural dynamic. Whether it's going to change back or what's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months, I think we'll see. I mean, I think there's a general acceptance that lower bit rates, slightly lower quality stuff is acceptable. It's not everybody's first choice. I think there's certainly a dynamic of Zoom fatigue you're seeing, obviously. Everybody wants the highest quality at the end of the day, but it's just not always practical. So I think there's definitely an acceptance of lower bit rates. I mean, from our perspective, you know, from the world, the way we look at it, again, sort of live first, whether it's finished pieces or raw acquisition of content, whatever it is, full-time channels, it doesn't matter. We're pretty agnostic to it. But we are spending a lot of time bringing in sources that are way lower than you would have ever imagined, that fit in side by side on the same finished piece timeline with, you know, 50 megabit produced content. So the dichotomy is quite fascinating if you think about what content looks like. And then Mike's point about playout is another good one. We have a tool that goes along with our transport and acquisition solutions that's a playout tool. And one of the fundamental requirements we have is that same tool, that tool needs to be able to play out WebRTC sources, RTMP sources, live sources, non-live sources, H.264 sources. I mean, any format under the sun on the same timeline, because folks like Mike and the Sinclair team are compressing and aggregating content at a standard codec in their archives for all the reasons he just mentioned. You don't want to go through another process of re-encoding or retranscoding again before it hits play out. And
I think that's probably the
Yeah.
biggest takeaway, right, for the industry is that native rates are what's most important to us going forward. You know, in this right tool for the job kind of scenario, right? That's kind of what we're talking about. Is that if you're doing a feed to a transmitter, you're going to use a pretty robust bit rate at a great codec. But if you're doing a news feed and it's the only way you can get out of Zoom, it's a different story. I think that the right comment is there that avoid retranscoding it. You know, avoid re-encode, avoid that concatenation cycle as best you can. And that's something that we spend a lot of time with, right? Our approach is we have very strict standards on everything we do, and on our archive especially, there is a very stringent standard middleware or mezzanine type of level that we use, and it's used across the board for every single system in the news department because we know it's a survivable bit rate that will still look fine over the air, and it's a manageable bit rate for that storage, as Mike was talking about. So I think standards and practices, yeah, I mean, I can use all the buzzwords, right? Standard practice, right tool for the job, right tool for the job. I mean, I can check all the boxes, but that's true, right? It's really true. I think is anybody who's looking at this, I think that's what you have to consider is that you have to plan out where you want these rates to be used and standardize on them and enforce it, right? And, you know, for example, we'll use a mezzanine or even native codec for creative services or production, because that particular camera master may need that quality, would be at 4K or whatnot. But for news, we're going to stick with our standard H.264, you know, between 12 and 18 megabit VBR, right? So it's the right tool.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting about that, Joe, too, is that you have to stay ahead on what's happening with the codecs.
Yeah.
You know, because 265 is right. I mean, it's right there. Everybody knows about it. They know that it's the possibility to cut down definitely the transmission bit rates. And you know, we've done some testing with 265 where we're generally bringing stuff in at 8 megabits for MPEG 2 or MPEG 4, and we can get it down to 6 and still have a good 1080, 1080i or 1080p picture that you can then take into your archive and utilize over time.
Right,
so there's so many different compressions that are out there that are coming. And then as we start to move into the IP environment and we start to look at what groups like Zixi are doing and what SRT actually brings to the table, it gives us the opportunity to rethink how we're dealing with all of this. Mm-hmm. And then we can start to tie into, play out systems like what Mike was talking about and do exactly what you're saying. We keep it native as much as we can from origination all the way through.
There's another level of complexity within the codecs, and that is the level of processing that we're applying, because these codecs are asymmetric. How much how much processing are we going to put in the front end of this? Okay, and how much can we afford, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of both time and CPU cost, if you're doing that in the cloud, do I want something that's running 4 times real time? That's going to give me a really low bit rate and really good quality and reduce my storage costs over time. So am I going to invest up front in, some cost for transcode that's going to reduce my storage time? Or am I going to reduce my transcode time and produce a file that's going to cost more to store over a longer period of time? It's really interesting piece of calculus to play.
Where do you want to put your money, in the EC2 instance or in Glacier, right? What it's saying is where you're going to do it. And I think you're right. It's the life cycle of the asset, and it's funny that we're looking at some assets that came out of news that are film based, 16 millimeter film, right? And some of the discussion is what should that bit rate be? And a lot of it is that it should be a higher bit rate because it's going to live longer and will probably be used more into the future, as opposed to some of these other pieces of content, especially off of SD tape, that may not have as long legs. And it's interesting. Now that's the conversation. I'll share what the final result is that we'll stick with our standards. It's how we
What's interesting, I guess, here is a lot of this needs to be editorially driven, and metadata is so key in editorial metadata is so key into managing your different media resolutions and your different storage units and the policies that goes with it. I mean, always when we install a new system at a new customer, I mean, we have so many different policies depending on the nature of the content, those kind of metadata, and so on. So up to now, we came up to the point where we encode 2 resolutions at the same time. So we encode usually a proxy, and we encode an editing resolution, depending on the nature of the metadata, actually. And then it's a matter of applying those policies to move the media around, to archive the media, and to potentially purge the media as well. And that's, that needs to be editorially driven, basically.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about having, a proxy and your mezzanine or high res. And the proxy is a really good way to avoid those cloud egress charges. Because a lot of times what we'll find is that users, and our users put a lot of time in planning and effort, and they're really great at what they do, but they like to look at the video. Well, just to look at the video as opposed to use it, a proxy is perfect for that.
Yes.
And what we do in many of our systems is that we host the proxy within our WAN or within a lower cost server environment, right? As opposed to something that every time you access one, you're going to get the egress tax. And this has proven to be an excellent model for us. One that if you're not headed there already, one that you should think about.
And one thing also, the proxy allows you. I mean, we provide the software infrastructure to produce news to many groups in the US, and very often there are obviously multiple sites, own and operated stations. So everyone keep locally the high resolution. This is usually the practice for those, because having the high resolution on the cloud usually has a cost. But sharing the proxy in the cloud has really an interest. So, I mean, we have for those customers usually a centralized bucket in a cloud provider. So everyone can share the proxies, and then on request, I'm in New York, I'm interested in some media that is hosted in Chicago, then we transfer automatically the high resolution because I need it locally. And these kind of practices allows you also to do what we call remote editing. So, I have Adobe Premiere locally installed, and I can start really to edit content for which the high resolution is somewhere else, and I'm just dealing with proxies. I'm caching locally those proxies. I can edit offline, and then when it comes to finishing the project, the whole process is going to be done, in the central site automatically, as well as the rendering.
There's another key reason, and I'll just throw this out there, that having the proxies in the cloud is that when you do look at using AI tools, especially hosted by that same cloud provider, the content is already there. So if you're going to use, a recognition or a speech to text poly, name them, right? you can use any of them, and to run them against the proxy is usually as effective as the high res.
It's a must. Otherwise, the
Yeah.
costs just become unmanageable very quickly, especially in a news environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mike, I did want to follow. Joe and Raul are doing some of my work for me, because my next question was to talk about the cost considerations of on-premise versus cloud storage. But I know, Mike, you have some thoughts on this topic and a lot of experience with it. Can you talk about how, Sinclair approaches that, and and overall, where do those cost considerations stand today in 2021 compared to where they were a few years ago, maybe?
Yeah, the elephant in the room is LTO, and everybody says it's an old technology that doesn't have a place. I would agree it no longer has a place, but it's not because it's an old technology. In fact, it keeps moving forward, and that's the problem. The density of the tape keeps going up higher and higher. So as our compression becomes more efficient, we're able to put more content on a tape. And at the end of this year, we will be able to store a year's worth of a small news station's archive on a single tape. Okay, that's a problem. Okay, that's a problem when multiple people need to access content on that tape at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a problem because you're running the same tape all the time. It's a problem because you have all the content in the same tape unless you're duplicating them. And then you're locked into the same cycle of every 4 to 8 years having to replace all your drives and all your tapes. So it's still a good technology, but just not for news. It's just it's moved in a different direction. So putting this stuff in the cloud at manageable bit rates is a good thing, but we need new sets of tools and better tools for those that are already providing them to allow us to predict what our costs will be over time. Okay. Now, and I'm sure Joe has these spreadsheets, as do I. What is the rate of content growth at a station? What's the rate of content growth across all the stations? Where do I expect the cost of cloud storage to go over this time? How much of a discount is my cloud storage provider going to give me for this? And what is my egress rate going to be over time? We just need software producers of software tools for us to start putting these in, so we can make better business decisions rather than building everything into custom spreadsheets. But again, this is driven by the business. Okay, I had somebody internally, and we're very diverse. We had somebody internally come up with some historic film and said, "Gosh, I've got to save this." And I said, "Okay, yes, we can go ahead and scan this." And they went back and brought back a quote for digitizing it at 10-bit DPX. Okay. News film at 15 gigabits a second, and then they said, "I can't afford to put this in the cloud, so I'll put this on LTO." I was like, wait a second, the film's going to last longer than the LTO is at this point, right? So you really, it's a complex kind of game you have to play about what is the real value of this content, how is it going to be reused, okay, how much is it going to cost me to save it over time, and what's the best storage media, whether that's in the cloud or a can of film in a temperature controlled space to store this stuff on. And it makes life complicated and fun sometimes, but complicated.
Renard, do you want to weigh in on some of the complications you deal with when you look at on-premise versus cloud storage?
Yeah, I mean, Mike hit a lot of it on the head, but the real complexity that we deal with is that we have to be sort of an all open shop. We've got to be able to accept almost anything coming in, because we don't know what the latest breaking news is going to come from. And a lot of times we may not even have, sort of a way for us to bring it in. So we're depending on some of our affiliates, and whatever they have is whatever we have to take, especially when in the midst of breaking news. So yeah, there's that part of things that we have to focus on. But like I said, Mike really hit on a number of points, is that there is a human aspect to all of this, and there's also a human education aspect to all of this. And him simply telling the person that by the way, film is going to last longer than LTO. It's something as simple as that comes into the thought process of what it is that we have to deal with every day. And so we're at the gate a lot of times, sort of trying to guide you know, what actually happens and where things go. And when it all comes down to it, if we truly are the owners of the archive or truly owners of the cloud instance or, you know, wherever it may be, then, you know, we're going to make that final decision. And for us, you know, what we're dealing with is, like I said, we want the best that we can get, as you know, as many of the folks on the call have said, as much as we can afford, and we want to be able to access it in a very, very quick manner. And for us, that's where a lot of the AI and the metadata comes in for us to, you know, discuss a little bit later in this conversation. But those are things that, you know, we deal with every day. And, you know, Mike, if somebody comes up with that application, that software that gets us out of all these custom spreadsheets, please give me a call. Let me know. I would love to to start working on something other than these spreadsheets.
It's
Well,
fun. I'm sorry, Glenn. I just
yeah,
wanted to.
go ahead, Rick.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's just, I'm sitting here thinking, I bet my marketing department will hate what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it. I was just thinking that I'm feeling a little guilty that in some ways LTN is creating the problems you guys are trying to solve, in the sense that we've put this live video network out there that feeds affiliates into CNN all day long, and it feeds sports into Turner Sports, and feeds a lot of content that moves around the Sinclair world. And like, what do you do with it all? And how do you manage it? And how do you decide what's good and bad? And I think, you know, broadly speaking, not just LTN, IP transmission has really changed the way you have to think about managing archives. So it's sort of, I almost take it on us to solve the problem we've helped create. Again, marketing would hate that as a tagline, but I think that's a big part of this story. And I think maybe that will lead us into a conversation about how do you manage it in metadata and integrations and all of that.
I do think that we're at a place in technology and the business right now. And Rick, I will go back and touch on a place that we both worked before. Okay. When the AP went from transmitting text via teletype to, you know, at 1200 or 2400 baud over satellite, they found that they were burning through too much paper, too many boxes of paper, because they could print faster, which led to the development of the newsroom computer system, right? So I think we're at a similar point here. We're creating so many things that can feed in and create these processes that it's really arguing that there should be some new tools to deal with that. We can't continue to deal with these new things using old tools like spreadsheets.
It's actually it mirrors what the consumers are feeling, right? The consumers are being inundated with all of this information from 1,000 different sources, right? We're feeling it on the business side. They're feeling it on the commercial side, or the end user side.
You know, we are going to get to that metadata question next, but I do want to take a question from the audience. There's been a couple of people asking questions about artifacts occurring in, you know, this compressed storage when you access it multiple times. How concerned are you guys about that? You know, artifacts appearing after a succession of multiple transcodes over the life of the asset.
I'll take that one first, and I'm sure the other guys will have some comments on it. But the key there is to know where the threshold is, and it drops off very quickly in terms of rate and also number of times it can be run through transcode. So whenever you play this game of trying to get it down to the lowest possible bit rate without having a big perceptual problem, you really have to take into account how many times will this be transcoded, okay, and how much further might the bit rate be reduced. So to come to the optimal format and bit rate, you really need to know what the rest of your production and transmission chain looks like to play close to that line. If you don't know what that looks like, you have to go to a higher, safer bit rate.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. And, you know, the things to think about are what if it's an asset that's going to go to editing, what your sequence codec is, right? And then what your export codec is. And if you can use one that's either common to where you can use things like smart render, where you're not concatenating, or you use something that's more of a do no harm sequence codec, that's important. But I think the key here is as Mike was saying, is you have to plan it out and make sure that you plot out each codec along the way. The way we tend to avoid it is that we cache it's a small algorithm that we use that keeps the most used or last used archived content in-house. So you can access it very easily, meaning you don't have to pull it from the cloud every time. So it's really only used once. So if it's the same asset that's going to be in a story today and tomorrow and the next day, they can go back and use that original source access or asset and not go back to yesterday's package and cut down from there. And that helps with quality a lot. It also helps with making it look more original or new, because you're not reusing the same clip over and over, as we see many times in local news, right?
This is where the genealogy and the fact that you keep track of what is coming from where, what are the childs, what production did we make out of that source of content and so on is absolutely key, because you really want to first track how you're using your content and how it is distributed to many platforms. But you also want to make sure that you keep that link and you always be able to refer to the original source of material. And that we put a lot of effort into having this genealogy process being compatible with our tools, but also external tools like Adobe Premiere or Avid Media Composer, for instance. So you always keep track, what is coming from where. And this is super important when you do AI, because when you ingest a source and you're going to apply speech to text to it, you're going to edit, okay? And at the end of the day, you don't want to reapply the same processes, the same AI processes again and again, okay? You want that piece of information, those metadata, to travel through. So you really save money on not indexing several things many times,
So Raul, you open the door, so I'll go through it. And this isn't intended to be a swipe specifically at Delet, but at most PAM vendors. And that is, many PAM vendors are very effective metadata filters. Okay, especially when you have content coming from cameras. Okay, nearly all, and I'm generalizing here, but nearly all production systems will filter out the metadata coming from the camera, whether that's the geospatial metadata coming from the camera or anything that's been stamped into that. It just doesn't travel through the production process. And we need processes in news that allow us to understand what the genealogy of content is as it's coming from various sources. Did this come from my camera? Did this come from a camera within my group? Did this come from one of my network affiliate feeds? What are the rights that are associated with that? And all of that metadata needs to be carried through the editing process.
Yes.
And right now, a generalization, and all generalizations are wrong, okay? But a generalization is that most editing and PAM systems are at that ingest and creating that first piece, that first edit, are very effective filters at stripping out the metadata.
Okay, and one point you're making is absolutely right about broadcast rights. You really need to track with genealogy those broadcast rights, because you don't want to be fined by Reuters or AP for using pictures you don't have the right to do. So yeah, this is what we have done for years now.
So, we've been talking about the importance of metadata and managing all these steps in content management. How should that metadata be generated? And how much can broadcasters use AI or machine learning to improve the cataloging and discoverability of content, and then maybe talk about how much that maybe costs too. But first, I guess I'll throw it to Renard, because I know you're looking at a big project along these lines at Warner Media. How can AI help?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that like everyone said, the key to, and I strongly believe this, so I'll probably be the first one that the robots adopt when it's all said and done. But the key to all of this is that the less human interaction that we have with metadata, the more accurate it's actually going to be. If we can take the metadata directly from, a camera from the original source as we go through our transcodes and so forth, and actually maintain it throughout the process, what that does is the orchestration layer that Joe was talking about, it makes that orchestration layer a lot more powerful and a lot more valuable within the system itself. So when we think about, for at least, what we're looking at, when we start to think about AI and ML, the key to it for us is to make sure that the input that we have, or the metadata that we have, one, that it's true, that it's clean, but two, that it has as much of a reduced amount of bias as it possibly can. And a lot of that is usually when, like I said, you don't have the human interactions with it. The other thing that you can do with that is it actually creates a place where you can enhance your discoverability. When it comes to using news or sports and sort of your archive and things like that, the main thing is really, how do I actually increase the amount of discoverability for this? If I want to see, the 1976, election, footage, I want to see everything that had to do with Plains, Georgia, or everything that had to do with California, and those were the two battling states for the presidency. If I want to see that, it's good to have all of that data as a part of what you're tagging and what you're actually putting in at the beginning of the process. So that's where a lot of it for me comes in, where it's like, look, we have to make sure that you get your metadata right at the beginning. And if you build in a way for you, or a process for you to be able to go in and actually alter that metadata, at a later point, it needs to have some security built around that, so that you don't get into the point of having individuals go in and tag it with what they think it should be, and then making sure that there is a checks and balances to make sure that it's being tagged with what it actually is. That is all part of this whole process when you start to look at this, because when you build machine learning models and you start to really look at what you want to replicate over and over again, there has to be a point and a sort of a base within that model. And within that model, that base has to actually be sort of the origin of truth for you. If you have metadata that's constantly shifting on a particular piece of content, then you will never be able to create that base, which means that your model will never be true. And those are the things that we started to look at as we started saying, okay, how do we make our archive even more valuable than it already is? And so that's where artificial intelligence, and I really lean more towards machine learning than artificial intelligence, because that's really what we're doing right now, is we're really building models based off of the data that we have. And those models are then hopefully over time, if we train the algorithms correctly, they will begin to be able to make some of the simple decisions. For us to say, okay, I'm looking for everything from 1976. Okay, well, are you looking for everything from 1976 for a particular reason? And then your next question, and start to ask you the questions that are needed for you to get exactly what it is that you're looking for. And that's really where I would like to see all of this go. And those are the things that I'm focused on as part of my ProdTech work.
Yeah, I like to say that that you have to preserve the integrity of the superset, right? So it's a long way of saying is don't delete any metadata, right?
Yeah.
Is that if it comes in, it has value. A machine learning engine is going to rate and rank that value of the metadata as you learn more about the content. But if you know less about the content, the less accurate that algorithm is going to be. So the integrity of the metadata is yes important, but how big the metadata is, how robust it is important. And then what I like to kind of explore is that how do you make it more robust? And one of the key, I call it almost easy, or like the low-hanging fruit of AI these days is speech to text, right? It's almost becoming a commodity. It can be containerized, so there's a lot of reasons that to add that to your workflow. And when you do, all of a sudden you've got this great body that you can search against. But more importantly, it adds to the original metadata that you have, and then you can start to build relationships inside the machine learning algorithm. And as Bernard said, and as we all know, is that the being able to surface content as you move along is the holy grail, right? Is that so essentially, searching turns into finding, right? And that's the key. As we've said, oh, let's search. No, you want to find, and having a good solid ML behind that metadata is what's gonna help you move forward.
And
So-
what's really great about what you're talking about, Joe, is that when we get into speech to text, the thing that we also have to be careful of is bias, because speech to text, it's really sensitive to accents.
Yes.
It's very sensitive to accents. So you still have to have either an algorithm that's kind of going to go back and try and clean up what it may think that someone said, and so forth. So you get a little bit, you keep going further and further in there. And even though I like to think that, if we can keep human beings out of metadata, we're going to be in a better place. With that particular problem, that's where we have to add the humans back in to, because the machine is not going to be able to tell.
And as we've been saying in the enable media discussions that we've had over the last couple of years, is that no single technology provider can do it all, right? And that's the revelation. So you're probably looking at a best in breed speech to text engine for each type of application or accent or sporting event or background, or all of that. And and I think it's up to us, of course, as the user base, to tell these technology providers exactly what we need. So if there isn't a tool out there that can pull out a particular accent properly and do a well done speech to text for that act, we need to tell those providers, hey, you need to build this because we'll buy it, we'll come, right?
Yeah, great point.
Like looking at it's interesting with the poll question about are you using AI or machine learning to help manage your archive today? 79% of the respondents said no. So I guess there's a lot of work to be done here. Raul, can you talk about, how much can broadcasters lean on AI and machine learning today to generate the metadata for them and automate some of this process and take those mistake-prone humans out of one end or the other? Maybe it's the front end, maybe it's the back end.
Well, actually, really, first of all, I really agree with the fact that speech to text is becoming a commodity and it's pretty cheap, and it really brings a lot of value to your workflow. So this is primarily what our customers are looking for, first of all, because with speech to text, you can not only index your content, but you can also deal with your captions. You can then start to be able to automate some translations of captions, for instance, but also you can rough cut based on the transcript. So there are plenty of, out of the box user interface that you can use easily in your workflows to facilitate your life. And the second aspect is, and about the accent, I have to do a special mention to Speechmatics because they deal really well with the different accents, and we tested with plenty of different material with noisy backgrounds and so on, deep Australian accent or Scottish accent, etc., and they deal really, really well with it. Anyway, the point is, it's really about what you want to do with these metadata. So there are activities around captioning and so on, so that's great. And these obviously activities around surfacing content that you would have not find if you didn't index your content, right? So we did several experiments in the past, and we have what we call a recommendation panel. Basically, if you're in a news environment, I type a story, I'm talking about, COVID pandemic and, it's growing and so on. So I'm going to have a number of results automatically presented to you, video results or, relevant searches that are automatically made in the back office. So it brings you, relevant wires, audio, video content, pictures, and so on, okay? But we have done that originally on tag matching, meaning that I write my story, I extract with NLP keywords and so on, and then I can find, some relevant content. And we have found then that machine learning was going to be a game changer in the way you recommend content. And there are now, very recent searches and technologies called transfer learning with some engines like BERT, B-E-R-T. Okay, so those are extremely efficient, so they are very expensively trained, and you can repurpose those engines, especially for those cases. So I'm a journalist, I'm typing a story, and each and every piece of media can be semantically encoded. And so we understand the meaning of the story. And then the recommendation is made by clustering, some results that are not too far away. So this is really based on the speech to text. So first you encode your video with speech to text, and then you do that semantic representation, and then the engine finds amazing results. So it's exactly like I am a journalist, I'm writing my story, and rather than spending half an hour doing 30 different searches to find the really relevant material and then classify all the results properly, so this can be done on millions of assets in less than a second. Okay, so this is a breakthrough technology that is going to enter in the broadcast market very soon. So we are experimenting with this now, and we found that the results are amazing, and they work across multiple languages. So I'm writing an English story, I can be recommended with French content because they have the same meaning. They talk about the same thing.
We're getting close to the end of our time, but I do want to ask Rick if you have any thoughts on how metadata can be generated through the transmission process, and
Sure. Yeah, sure. I'll try to be brief. So I don't have a lot to add in terms of what everybody else said in terms of the metadata. I mean, basically, we've made sure that we put the hooks into the transmission and acquisition and distribution, mostly on the acquisition side, to enable speech to text or face recognition or object. I mean, those hooks are there, and then it becomes a question of how you get the metadata into the workflow. But the other place that I think it's really interesting, and perhaps this is another webinar, Glenn, I don't know, is we've been using AI-driven metadata to drive production processes. And it touches some of the workflows that these gentlemen are responsible for. So using chips in basketballs and on the players on the court to create 3D, three-dimensional data about where everybody is on the court, and use that to drive on-screen graphics in real time with no human intervention. Or use that to drive the camera, which used to be operated by an operator, but now you know where the ball is at all times. And so that's interesting. Or using tote data in horse racing to dynamically drive or automatically drive a camera as the horses move around the track. And of course, all of that leads into wagering and gambling and all kinds of really interesting workflows, which is very much the future when you start talking about sports and esports. I know we talked a lot about news. I could talk news all day too, but I mean, that's the other side of this, or at least another side of it that I think is really important. And we spend a lot of time reacting to what our customers are asking us to do and then putting it into the services that we provide at the end of the day. I mean, it's not just sort of discoverability, but it's also production enablement. Oh, and automated clipping and automated replays and all of that kind of stuff is really possible if you sink your teeth into where the source of data is from the origination point.
Well, thanks. Yeah, well, maybe we'll bring you and Mike back for a webinar on the technology behind sports betting, because that's something that
and we could give you our picks as well if you'd like. I mean,
right.
We got that.
Well, anyway, we have come to the end of our time. We easily could have gone 2 hours. You guys have had a lot of great insights, and we got a lot of good questions from the audience. Sorry I didn't get to all of them, but we definitely hit a bunch of topics. And thanks again for your time and the audience for their attention, and have a good afternoon. So
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
A
Take
pleasure.
care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Joe.
See you guys.
You guys.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
it's good to see you guys, man. We haven't seen each other in so long.
I know. We'll have to do the next one of these is live.
All right, man.
Or in
All
person.
right. You let me know where.
All right, guys.
All right. Bye, guys.